thank you everyone for joining us today. We're thrilled that you could be with us and to contribute to the KT4D, or Knowledge Technology for Democracies project. I'll say a little bit more about that name in just a moment. But before I start, I just want to let you know that we are recording this webinar. So again, I see most of you have your cameras off, but I do hope that you'll still be willing to participate, even if you want to stay anonymous visually while we are recording the presentations. So as I mentioned, the project that is hosting you here today is called Knowledge Technologies for Democracy. And you may be wondering, what is a knowledge technology? You probably talk a lot about AI, and you probably talk a lot about big data. And these are things that we would consider knowledge technologies, technologies that are changing not just the way that we access information, but so revolutionary in the way that they are doing this, in the way we access information, but also in the way we see the world and indeed see ourselves, that they need an umbrella term to help us understand them. And for us in this project, we think that knowledge technologies captures that. And it helps us avoid some of the problems that sometimes come up when people say AI, but actually mean something different. They may just mean something that's algorithmically driven. They may mean specifically something like ChatGPT or a large language model driven chatbot. There's different things that can happen. So when we use this term, we're talking about things you know a lot about, but we're just using this different term in order to be a little more encompassing. And the project that we're working on is taking a slightly different approach to understanding the tensions that exist between these advancing knowledge technologies and democracy and citizen participation in democratic societies. And the way we're looking at this is not just through the lenses of different kinds of people, I'll say more about that in a second, but through the lenses of different kinds of interactions. So we're looking at innovation, the way we create new paradigms to use these technologies and benefit from them, but also education and the kinds of critical digital literacies we need to understand and assimilate these new technologies. And of course, regulation, by which we mean both policy, which I know you would all be very interested in, but also the way in which we can inform self-regulation through the fostering of an ethical imagination towards these kinds of technologies. And we do this by focusing on citizens, normal individuals like all of us, who find these technologies are more and more present in their day-to-day lives, through policy, the sort of professional identity of people who work specifically in policy, and of course through software development, so people who are building these technologies and need to understand their own role. So we have today a great group assembled. We had 50 registrants to this webinar coming from across 21 different countries. So we have a very, very good spread of interested parties, policymakers, but also researchers and civil society organizations as well. So I really hope that we'll have an excellent discussion over the course of the next hour and a half. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you some short presentations from some of the members of the project team from different countries and different kinds of institutions. In the project, we do have civil society organizations, but also researchers from different disciplinary perspectives, and of course, professional developers in the communication space, but also in the technology space. And you'll hear some of these different voices, but we also want to make sure that we hear from you. So we're going to have a number of opportunities for you to come back in and give us your feedback on the work we've done. And we're focusing specifically today on the messages in our policy brief, which is looking at the way in which current policy may not be as sensitive as we might like to see towards issues of culture. And you'll learn a lot more about that in the course of the webinar today. So in between the presentations, we'll take some pauses for both traditional questions, but also we have a few Slido polls for you, which we really hope that you'll participate in. And then after the presentations, we'll go into a few breakout rooms to make sure that we kind of can discuss with you and take from you the sort of feedback you might have for us on this work. And then we'll come back together and close the meeting with a report from those breakout sessions. So that is what we are looking to do with and for you today. And I think that that should be enough of a context to allow you to appreciate and benefit from our first presenter, who is my colleague at Trinity College Dublin, Dr. Eleonora Lima, who is a research fellow in the digital humanities. So without further ado, Eleonora, I'd like to turn over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Jennifer. So my brief presentation is going to discuss AI as a source of cultural risk. And I want to begin with a quote from the AI Act. And the AI Act says, like, the purpose of this regulation is to improve the functioning of the internal market and promote the uptake of human-centric and trustworthy artificial intelligence, while ensuring a high level of protection of health, safety, fundamental rights enshrined in the Charter. And this immediately raises a question: who exactly is the human at the center of this vision for AI? And while European shared values and rights are certainly important to protect, typically human-centric AI considers high-level principles without offering tailored approaches for specific communities. And this becomes particularly important when we consider how trust towards AI and its regulating institution is built and maintained. For instance, we might all agree with protecting EU citizens' privacy when developing AI systems, but it's also true that people understanding and concerns around privacy depend on their cultural values. And this leads to a second important question: what does trustworthy mean when disconnected from culture? And in the KT4D project, we argue that trust is fundamentally based on shared and understood cultural values. And culture is the lens through which we build trust. So in the time that I have today, I want to highlight two key points. First, I'll discuss how people trust in AI is culturally determined, how cultural habits and values play a crucial role in what people deem acceptable or too risky. And second, I'll explain how AI systems pose a risk to culture and cultural identity across the EU and beyond. And these can significantly impact people's participation in civic and democratic life. So while the AI Act focuses on individual privacy, information manipulation, and security risks, we believe in the KT4D project that cultural risks are equally serious and shouldn't be underestimated. So to the first point about how people trust is determined by culture, let me share some examples. So in countries with high baseline trust in public institutions, we usually see greater willingness to accept government-deployed AI. For example, in one of our workshops with Spanish citizens, our participants generally preferred having the Spanish government regulate AI rather than private tech companies. And conversely, historical experiences with institutional corruption foster skepticism. And with Polish citizens who participated in another of our workshops, we saw that they expressed more trust in private tech companies such as Google regulating AI than with their own government. Recent Eurobarometer data shows this difference clearly. In Lithuania, Denmark, and Finland, over 2/3 of respondents believe that new technologies and AI positively impact society. Meanwhile, in France, Slovenia, Germany, and Romania, only about half shares this optimism. And these variants depends on specific cultural attitudes about data and about governance. Considering Germany, strong historical concerns about surveillance influenced by experiences with the Stasi create deeper skepticism towards AI data collection. If we look at France, strong emphasis on collective values and state protection means AI system presented as servant collective welfare generate in general more trust than those focused on individual efficiency. If we consider Northern European countries, usually they are more accepting of data sharing with public institutions due to high institutional trust, but also expect clear reciprocal benefits and transparent governance structures. So for policymakers, understanding these cultural dimensions suggests the need for regionally adapted trust-building mechanism rather than assuming that uniform approaches to AI governance will foster equal trust across diverse European contexts. And let's turn now to specific cultural risks, beginning with the impact on European languages. So languages are crucial to people's meaningful democratic participation and serve as carriers for culture, identity, and knowledge. And this is why the uneven support for AI tools across European languages represents a major risk. According to the 2022 European Language Equality Report, English is the only official or co-official EU language receiving good support for AI and digital technologies. French, German, and Spanish form a secondary group with moderate support. All other official EU languages fall into the fragmentary support category, with some, like for example, Basque, Galician, Icelandic, and Welsh, barely passing the threshold. And we have then Irish and Maltese and others that have weak or no support at all. So in general, the uneven support for AI tools across European languages creates several democratic challenges. Information asymmetry. Citizens who primarily speak low-resource languages have reduced access to AI tools for information filtering, fact-checking, and political content analysis. Participation barriers. Without adequate AI support in their native languages, speakers face obstacles to full participation in digital civic discourse. And digital preservation gap. Low-resource language communities risk cultural and political marginalization because digital archives increasingly rely on AI systems favoring dominant languages. So for policymakers, addressing language inequality in AI systems requires targeted investment in linguistic diversity rather than just assuming that market forces will naturally support all European languages. This suggests the need for dedicated funding stream to develop language-specific data set and models for under-resourced European languages, but also mandatory multilingual support requirement for AI systems deployed in public services, and impact assessment that explicitly evaluate AI deployments and how it affects linguistic minorities. And then to my second example concerning generative AI and the potential erasure of European values. We must ask ourselves, what kinds of stories do AI tools tend to generate? And what do they generally exclude? Do these tools match the diversity of European cultures, communities, and values that we want to preserve? Current evidence suggests that generative AI tools reproduce normative identities and narratives, and they rarely represent less common values and perspectives. And this lack of cultural representation is fundamentally a political issue. Professor Jill Walker-Redberg from the University of Bergen is, for example, investigating how American and Anglo-centric AI origins can overshadow cultural heritage from other countries. And just let me share an example that she uses. This is the Norwegian children's story, When the Robbers Came to Cardamom Town, sorry. Published in 1955, this story is extremely popular to this day in Norway and Denmark. And it tells the story of three robbers who steal from the town of Cardamom. They are arrested, but they are treated well in jail, and they learn their lesson. And upon release, they become productive citizens of the Cardamom town. One becomes a fireman, one a baker, and one a circus manager. And they even save the town from a fire and become local heroes. So this story reflects Norwegian criminal justice values, prioritizing rehabilitation over punishment, and teaches these values to children. And it stands in contrast to, for example, Disney narratives, where villains typically remain villains and are punished at the end, or with Hollywood crime films that often glorify criminals. So generative AI could potentially bury cultural specific stories like Cardamom Town under homogenized American narratives. And this is both a cultural and political issue because these narratives, archetypes, these stories shape how we interpret the world and our possible actions within it. So for policymakers, preserving cultural narratives, narrative diversity requires moving beyond content moderation approaches, for example, blocking fake news, hate speech, and instead consider how AI systems can reproduce or marginalize European cultural expressions. And this means developing cultural impact assessment frameworks that evaluate AI systems representation of diverse European values and narrative, creating incentives for developers to incorporate regionally specific cultural databases, and support public media initiatives that leverage AI while prioritizing European cultural perspectives. And this is the case, for example, of the Finnish broadcasting company that pledged to only use generative AI technology developed in Finland. And with this, concludes my presentation, and I hope that these examples help illustrating why cultural considerations should be integrated into our approach to AI policy and regulation. And I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much for that, Eleonora. I think that was a great way of starting to position the KT4D project and the way that we take a slightly different approach, perhaps, to some of these questions. We're now going to have our first moment for a little bit of feedback from you all in the audience. So I hope you're ready to type a few words. Do you want to release the poll, colleagues? So for our first question, we want to ask around what cultural risks from AI you might believe are posed, or indeed posing the greatest threat to European democracy. We'll give you a few minutes to put some answers in. May not have the slide. Okay, so. And I would point out that these are completely anonymous, so do not be concerned that you will necessarily be in any way taking a public position on this. And I mean, I think it's interesting that we're seeing a relatively balanced response around the kind of the homogenization of the cultural narratives and the dominance of English and the erosion of the local cultural practices. I would say, from my point of view, I haven't actually voted, but seeing those local practices erode, because we've always thought of Europe as a place where one of the strengths is the unity of the diversity. There's a lot of talk about the problems of unconscious bias. And it's much harder to do that in a context where you have other practices, other languages, other ways of living, ways of knowing, and ways of being that are very much on your doorstep. And of course, when we lose those cultural narratives, when they become flattened out, Obviously, this is an impoverishment, not just of our cultural landscape, but of our democratic landscape, and of the potential for innovation and of the potential for peace and democracy. So I think that it's something that we definitely want to look at. So thank you very much for those inputs to the Slido poll. We have maybe one more minute to go to the second question, which is that in your policy work, which approaches to building trustworthy AI would be most effective? It seems we have a very even distribution of opinions here. But of course, the question of languages comes up again, the question of representation and the question of transparency. Obviously, transparency is an important driver of trust, which is very difficult in the context of these AI and big data systems, which may, on the one hand, have a reason to be non-transparent, which is related to the business model of the company that has developed them, but also which may be opaque by nature, which may be opaque even to those who have developed them. We don't always know exactly how AI algorithms or AI systems come to the conclusions they do. And if we do know that, then it's often very complex and not necessarily accessible to the average citizen. So how we can actually create a meaningful transparency that actually can transcend cultural context is a really important question. And I think also having the input of standards and the input of different kinds of representatives will be very important indeed. So do we now want to go to the third question? So going to, from a policy perspective, which intervention would most effectively address the cultural risks discussed today? And again, thank you for these. This is really interesting to see come in. I think building the strength of the regions is very important, and something that we can do far more on. There is a strong tendency to see technology as culturally neutral, and therefore its implementation is culturally neutral. But of course, we all know that technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it ever neutral. But I also really appreciate this idea that cultural impact assessment frameworks can exist alongside risk assessments. We need to understand that while the product safety view of risk is important, there's also a way in which these new technologies, which are really impacting on how we see ourselves and how we see each other, might require a different approach and a different perspective in order to make sure that they are truly trustworthy. So we might move on now to our second speaker. Again, another sort of short intervention to get you all thinking, but also to introduce you into the space where our project is active. And this presentation will be brought to you by Furkan Akar, who is project officer and researcher at Beyond the Horizon, another one of the KT4D partners. Thank you, Furkan.
Can everybody hear me and see my screen?
We hear you and we see your screen, Furkan. You're good to go.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am a project officer at Beyond the Horizon ISSG. I have normally a social science background, and I'm working at the same time with software developers as an analyst, so I have knowledge from the both sides. So that's why my title is From Awareness to Action: Integrating Cultural Insight in AI Governance. So Eleonora actually provided us with a very powerful framing about the concept of cultural risk, especially in AI governance. And I will pick up from there. So in this brief intervention, I want to focus our shift from identifying the problem to exploring what can be done about the situation. How do we translate? I mean, if we understand the culture and its implications, how can we translate this awareness into meaningful policy actions? In other words, how can we make sure that culture is not a footnote or add-on or plug-in in software terms, and but a core dimension of governance process? So here's my agenda. I will start with challenges of nurturing culture. I would like to emphasize the term nurturing, and then I will go to the 3 recommendations from KT4D project in our policy review. So let's start with challenges of nurturing culture. So in today's world, we all know that AI algorithms mediate or pervades much of our daily life, from news feeds to product suggestions, or I mean, in the latest updates, you will see that all of your notifications are prioritized by the algorithms. So even people who are messaging you needs to be filtered by the AI algorithms. But how do they work? So we don't know actually. While these systems can enhance convenience, yeah, they might at the same time invisibly reinforce the existing beliefs, creating echo chambers. Yeah, this has been a cliche. We all hear about it. But also, we lost our reality with the alternative perspectives. We lost the dialogue. When you look at the recent discussions in the United States about the polarization, one thing strikingly mentioned is that the lack of dialogue. So the AI and algorithms, cause us to lose. We thought AI becomes the ultimate mediator in our lives. At the same time, these technologies are mostly developed in, outside the EU. So that's another challenge, because these products created in other countries reflect their culture. So this highlights an important problem for us. So I just want to put some numbers just very briefly. So when you look at the AI investments, there's a stark difference between the UK and the United States. This is VC investments in AI for country. So we lag behind. So we have to deal with the tools that are created outside the EU. There are other challenges. The first one is that regulation can be too late, because this is a reactive approach. So the tools are developed, and at the end, you try to regulate and try to mitigate the risks too long after the product is on the market. The second one is that that's actually why we call these technologies are knowledge technologies. These are very complex technologies, and it's hard to manage and find a way to mitigate the risks. The third element I want to emphasize is that we generally confuse development with coding. Software development integrates a lot of different elements. Like there are product managers who are designing the product, and testers and software developers. So it's not only coding. So culture affects all of these sides. So product managers' worldview, culture can affect the product or AI tool as well. So that's why we need to nurture the culture along the process from start to the end, and we need to be very proactive instead of reactive. So what can we do? From the you will see detailed recommendations in our policy brief, but I would like to very shortly mention 4 different items. The first one is that incorporate culture into the AI policy making. So with the technology, another culture penetrates into our society via technology. So think about this. When we are talking about migration, we say that we will put integration courses people because they somehow can spoil the dynamics in the society as well. But these technologies, if we don't ask any culturally, assessments, mitigation risks, then yeah, they are in our society and they can do more harms than a few number of people. And secondly, the civic participation in AI policymaking. So we have to incorporate citizens into the AI policymaking process, because citizens are part of our culture. So that what makes the culture, because people are the very important element of the culture. So in this case, we need to implement more inclusive policies, which will drive more adoption, more influence, and people will feel more confident in the process. And also participation contributes to a greater understanding. The more people participate, the more they understand and they embed the process. This is very important. Also, another important point is that policymakers and researchers cannot cover every aspect or every risk. So that's why we need input from citizens and residents about these important technologies. The third one is that we need to understand, our citizens and residents need to understand, at least have a basic understanding of what is AI, what is digital literacy, what is media literacy, and we should provide a critical perspective when doing this, because AI is not magic, it's not a complete black box per se, but most of the time we just don't know the process. So we don't know how it's created, designed, and we don't know the implications and trade-offs. And this is very important for every citizen, and it should be maybe part of the civic education. The fourth element is integrating cultural awareness in software development process. So the world is changing very rapidly. Maybe you have heard of skill-based hiring. So the traditional ethics approaches do not work anymore. Why? Because most of the people without a bachelor's degree or master's degree in computer science can become an AI developer or data scientist, and the trend is increasing. So skill-based hiring is becoming much more mainstream nowadays. So in this sense, normally the traditional ethics courses are not sufficient themselves yet, but we have thousands of developers, data scientists who have never seen university at their life in terms of computer science. They just go to a boot camp or some kind of very packed 6 months courses and they start their careers. So that's why we need to think about how we can embed culture throughout all this process from start to beginning in the schools, in the boot camps, as well as in companies. We need to nurture culture. In companies, we need to stimulate this kind of thinking in all teams, product teams, designers, and software developers, etc. So in conclusion, if we are serious about building a trustworthy, inclusive, and democratic AI systems, we must treat culture as an structural element, not an afterthought, not a reactive approach. So we need to think about culture in every stage of the software development process and AI policymaking, and we need to include our citizens, and we need to empower them by giving basic and fundamental education so that we can have an inclusive society, we can have an inclusive AI. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening. And I'm sorry for the glitches.
That's quite all right, Furkan. I think that was the AI coming back to censor you. But seriously, I think you make some very, very good points there. And of course, you know, we struggle with software ethics anyway. So the idea that we now have a new set of challenges because unlike doctors or accountants, software developers are not accredited in any particular way. So it's about that kind of skills basis. So I wonder if now we might go to the second Slido, Paul, which starts with the first question of what you think is the biggest barrier to integrating cultural awareness into AI policy. Hopefully now we've, you know, convinced you of the importance of this, but obviously there are difficulties in making this leap, and we're very curious to know what you think those are. Mm. So we're starting with some of the big ones. And I mean, as I said before, is it the first law of technology? You know, technology is neither good nor is it bad nor is it neutral. And yet, oftentimes there is this sense that technology is neutral, and it's but it does come with a certain data set, with a certain kind of mentality in its development, and of course, capitalism when the technologies are being developed by particular profit-making bodies, that is going to drive a certain amount of what they do. And the lack of sense of responsibility. What's interesting we're finding is that the sense of responsibility is there, but it's always someone else's responsibility. And that becomes very interesting when you have things like privacy by design. Well, that implies that the designers really are able to care about privacy. But privacy actually isn't a priority in the community that is creating software. Those aren't the values that we instill in them, for many of the reasons that Furkan was talking about. No sufficient citizen participation, absolutely. An often homogenous group of developers, also absolutely true. Lack of financial incentives, face European alternatives. Yeah, Western Anglocentrism. These are all really important issues. They're all some of the things that we also would see as some of the barriers between trying to have the technology that we want and that would truly be human-centric and the technology that we are actually getting. Let's see, I see one more response coming in before we go to the next question. So I'll wait for that last one. This is going to be a long one, though. Aha, yes. Tradition, resources, assets, interpretations, future. These are all great. There is the questions of how these things can actually be a part both of AI and of policy. So these are certainly things that we want to consider. I wonder if we might go to the next question then. So which of these areas should be prioritized to improve cultural resilience in AI? Civic and digital literacy, cultural training and software development, more participatory policymaking, regulatory reform to expand risk definitions, or all of the above? Do you want to go to the results? Thank you. Really interesting. And You know, the digital literacy is important. In KT4D, we actually are focusing mostly on what we call critical digital literacy. There's a tendency within digital literacy to say that if someone can code, they can understand how to use an AI-driven tool, but actually there's a huge gap between those things, between being able to understand the mechanisms of a complex knowledge technology and the mechanisms that you would use to build a simple gaming application or something like that. The cultural training and software development, it's interesting to see that come out very high as well. We had some workshops within KT4D with software developers, and it became very clear that whereas they felt empowered to work, the sort of the best of them felt empowered to talk about ethics and to talk about intersectional identities, the idea of multiculturalism, that would have an effect on the way their products would be used, was something that they found very challenging and did not feel that they were prepared to deal with. So this may be something that can work. And of course, the idea of participatory policymaking and citizens' assemblies is something that's very much at the heart of what we've done. And the idea of how you can digitally enable these without taking away what's important about democratic exchange, and also within the regulatory reform, which we'll talk about in one of the breakout groups. Okay, next slide. So current AI risk models are too narrow to capture cultural harm. Do you agree or disagree? These answers are neither in favor, nor are they not in favor, nor are they neutral. Interesting to see the neutrality kind of drop relatively close to the bottom. And again, there are potentially ways we can expand the current models. There are ways in particular, perhaps, that we can protect culture outside of the risk models. But it's good to see that there is a relatively strong agreement with this statement, which again is certainly borne out by what we found within the KT4D project. It's that there is a level to which the cultural harms are being left by the wayside by our risk models. Okay, I think that's the last of our Slido polls, if I'm not mistaken. So thank you very much for that input. We're going to make you work even harder now, but hopefully in the interest of being able to have your opinions heard and incorporated into the work we do. So you will now hear two more presentations, one from the psychological perspective, so looking from the individual up, and one more from the governance perspective, so looking from the kind of the institutions and the policy downward. And so we're going to start with the first of those, which is on the perception of use of AI in society, from Juicy Cyril, who is our postdoctoral researcher in applied social cognition at Strain Innovation. So Juicy, please take it away with your presentation.
Yeah. Can you see the slides? Yes.
We actually see you now.
Okay. So.
They were there, but then it went to your camera.
Here?
Hold on one second. Excellent. We're good to go.
Okay. So as Jennifer said, so we will talk about our experimental results on the perception of the use of AI in society. And in particular, we will concentrate on a topic, which is that of creativity. So we'll try to understand how AI system, generative AI system, can actually threat human creativity, and what we could do to preserve it. So we'll start with a recent case from the news. Maybe everyone of you has heard about what happened in March 2025. So GPT-4 added a new visual generation function, in particular, so which allows people to transform their own photos in a style which is taken from for other animated movies, and in particular by the sharing of one picture by a Seattle engineering post, which got more than 45 million views. People started imitating that, which generated a lot of debate, so positive and negative. So this mass imitation also was also adopted by politicians. For instance, if you see the White House post on the arrest of Latin American women. And so it started, and from there are a very big debate started on the fact of whether what it means, what are the risks to actually make art based on the artwork of other artists, especially so since this has especially concerned the Ghibli studio as this imitation as concerned that, and we know that Miyazaki himself had already denounced AI art as an insult to life itself. So we'll try to understand what are the legal and ethical concerns about this. So one of those, of course, there are the problem of the infringement of artist rights through the unauthorized use of their work, but also maybe also this promise of democratized art could mask actually a deeper thread of artistic devaluation. So let's first dive into what it means to be creative, what's actually a creative work, and let's try to understand whether actually AI art can be truly creative. So from psychology research, we know that creative input is creative output goes more than just the output itself, because it includes the effort, the intention, and so the subjective expression. And we know also that people are really looking for this human sensitivity, this humanity when they perceive art. So, for instance, study shows that the same artwork is rated as of higher quality if people believe that it was made by human compared to actually technology that made it, because people are when they experience art, they are looking for the purpose-driven quality of the artwork rather than the pattern-based as it is for artificial intelligent art. And also the art that made by the system tends to be less diverse and more homogenized, so less original, let's say. And this has generated, as we said before, a debate around whether it's fair actually to use those images to make new art, because on one hand it can threaten jobs and recognition, but also it's an unauthorized use of art or creators' work, which is why there are a lot of protests going on, strikes and lawsuits, which reflect these rising ethical tensions. So we propose that actually this since AI art is there, so we should actually think about how to integrate it, or also how to integrate a new idea of art and authorship, because the traditional idea of an author, it was this individual voice that is that springs from vision, from emotion, from inspiration, while now AI introduces this collective data-driven creation, which could be positive on one hand, like accelerating production, but only if human credit remains central. So this said, we will show you our research lines, and especially the results that we got from our experiments. So in general, we use scenario-based experiments to investigate how individuals morally evaluate the involvement of artificial intelligence, depending on the subjective creative nature of the task, as well as other factors such as transparency, so being transparent or not about using AI, and AI literacy. So the knowledge that we have about AI systems, together with the competence that we have in using those systems. In the first experiments, for instance, participants read scenarios, so real scenarios, where a person used the AI to complete a task, which was either creative, such as writing a novel or composing music, or mechanical, practical, for instance, summarizing a meeting. In some scenarios, the AI use was openly stated, so transparent, and in others it was hidden, so not transparent. And I will show you some of the key findings. First of all, we noticed that people tended to judge using AI in creative tasks as less fair than in practical ones. Second, we also found an effect for the transparency. So hiding AI use led to lower fairness and trust ratings in general. So people tended to see it as more negative when people were hiding the fact that they had used AI to do a work, to do a job. And lastly, we also found that AI knowledge, AI literacy had an impact also on those. And in particular, people with greater AI knowledge, they judged the use of AI as as more fair, so less unfair, let's say. So here we can see how we should really think of AI literacy as a key factor, as a key moderator to also shape people perception and also shape people decision making and habits. For the second experiment, we use always the same line of research, but we consider a particular case of work scenario, that is that of recruitment. So we had people reading those real scenarios where there was either an applicant using AI to write either a CV or a letter of motivation, or a recruiter using AI to evaluate a CV or letter of motivations. So what we found from the evaluation that participants gave in those scenarios was that humans in general were rated as fairer and more trustworthy than AI agents when they were either when they were the recruiters or when they were applicants. So when a document was written or evaluated by a human, people preferred it, basically. We also found an effect of people having trust in the competencies of AI systems, and generally, when they were more confident in the competence of AI, they judged the recruitment process as more fair. And also, and related to the subjective expression, to the creativity part, we also found that the emotional involvement of the task was important in the perception of the people. In particular, when tasks were emotionally sensitive, were judged to be emotionally sensitive, as for instance, writing a letter of motivation, which requires more emotion compared to just writing a CV. So people perceived it more fair for when it was a human to evaluate or write this document. While for the AI, we found the reverse pattern. So when they knew it was an AI system that did it, so they tended to judge it as much more unfair. And this said, we can from those findings we can summarize that people actually value human intentionality and emotional effort, and especially we saw it that is especially true for creative work, creative content. We saw also that transparency has a role in this. So they, in general, judged it as more fair. They prefer when the people were actually transparently saying that we're using AI, or they were supported by AI when doing a job. And we also importantly found that an effect of AI literacy. So when people actually have a knowledge of how AI system work, or they feel confident about their own competence in using it. So this actually can impact their evaluation of fairness and evaluation of trust. So once said that, we can propose some advices for both users and systems, institutions evaluation, to try to preserve this creative dimension, which is very, very valuable in terms of human products. So first of all, for users, we would like to foster this reflective and transparent use. So being transparent when you see AI, and also thinking before prompting. So the key is to encourage independent thought before turning directly to AI tools. To the systems, we advise to avoid to reinforce trends and mainstream aesthetics, and to value this to value variation and promote originality, and include features that discourage blind copying and standardization. And for education, as we saw that AI literacy, AI knowledge has a very strong impact on the people's perception, on individuals' perception of fairness and trust evaluation, we advise to take it into account, to teach ethical and strategic use, AI use in classroom, help students understand when AI enhances creativity and when it undermines it, and also to focus on fairness, effort, and authorship as key ethical markers.
That's great. Thank you so much, Giussi, especially for those last few recommendations, which I think are very, very astute and very kind of implementable. Without further ado, we're going to now turn to the other perspective, which will be brought to us by Atte Ohanen, who is research manager at Demos Helsinki and a doctoral researcher at the University of Turku. Atte, please.
Yes, pleasure. Thank you all. Great to see you. I'll be talking a bit more from a policy perspective. Something I would highlight there is the kind of speed and opacity by which we're kind of seeing with the AI development. I think that's very prevalent from a policy perspective as well. One could argue that AI systems are changing faster than societies or communities kind of simulate them, creating risks. And something that we're kind of trying to create, and KT4D is this framework for democratic AI governance in response to those developments, focusing on how we can govern those developments in a more democratic fashion. From that perspective, I think many of you might be aware of the so-called Collingridge dilemma, which essentially says that the impacts of technology cannot be easily predicted until they're deployed in society in a rather widespread fashion. But at that point, the regulation is already rather difficult. So we have this kind of two intersecting lines. On the other hand, you kind of need some predictability in those technologies to be able to regulate it. But at the same time, the control over the technology goes down as it diffuses across the society. So this is a rather prevalent dilemma in all of the policies and regulations we're seeing. And that's also something we can kind of see in EU currently. Obviously, there's been a lot of ushering of different policy proposals currently implementing the AI Act. Same goes for Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act. And there's new initiatives coming to the forefront, like European Democracy Shield. These policies do, to some degree, tackle the kind of democratic perspectives. For example, the AI Act does classify systems that influence voting behavior as high-risk systems. And the European Democracy Shield tries to tackle disinformation by external actors. But I think it's worth bearing in mind that AI systems can rather indirectly disrupt different pillars of democracy. So we can't only rely on these rather kind of direct forms of regulation. And at the same time, we're also seeing the kind of the geopolitical landscape shifting towards innovation, deregulation, given well the state of the world that we are currently in. And that's also somewhat reflected on what we've seen coming from the EU. So, for example, in the context of AI content action plan, there's a lot of focus on AI factories, apply AI strategy, and Cloud and AI Development Act, etc. I don't think it's all, well, this can also be seen as kind of something that we can leverage towards a more infrastructural understanding of AI and democracy, which I'll return to in a couple of slides. So that's also perhaps a positive silver lining in all of this. But in terms of the pillars of democracy I mentioned, it might be, when we're thinking about AI and democracy, it might be worthwhile to think a bit more in a bit more disciplined fashion about what those different aspects to democracy are. So you can make a distinction between different pillars of democracy, like say equality, and there the kind of risks for AI might be more so related to biases, harms, economic inequalities, right? So opportunities might be more about kind of something in terms of algorithmic fairness and so on. But the point here is that rather than just talking about democratic values in plural, it perhaps is worthwhile to think about different aspects of democracy that are important, worthwhile preserving, and what are the different risks and opportunities that might link to those different pillars. But that is to say that obviously when I think about AI and democracy, there's different risks that we're concerned about. There's direct misuse. Those might be disinformation, surveillance, electoral manipulations I mentioned. Then there's kind of still direct but unintentional risks. Those might be the biases, opaqueness of models, perhaps safety risks of more advanced models and so forth. But I think from the perspective of democracy, perhaps it's, I think the most worrying signs are the kind of structural risks that might be rather opaque and indirect and hard to see. So that those are more so related to concentration of power, to different companies, or even models, in general, the lack of democratic oversight of AI, perhaps even the diminishing epistemic agency of citizens as we become more reliant on systems, kind of lingering economic inequality, and an overall social distrust. That being said, in KT4D, we're also concerned about or interested in the possibilities and opportunities they might provide. And from that perspective, it's also important to recognize that these systems can also aid democracy by making, say, more complex information more accessible, facilitating political expression of different groups, in general facilitating deliberation between citizens and identifying consensus between different groups in a more decision-making fashion. But I think all of this requires kind of intentional efforts for us to go there. And we can't just assume that AI progress or development in the kind of status quo fashion will lead there. From that perspective, it might be worthwhile to think about the different kind of the life cycle of AI systems. So what are the different aspects there? We're worried about preserving these democratic qualities. So oftentimes there's the distinction made between design, data, and development and deployment of systems, and the different aspects there that might be worthwhile to consider when we're thinking about different aspects of democracy. So I think there's been a lot of focus on the deployment stage, but there's other things as well. And I would argue that the different stages of this AI life cycle of AI systems, they do appear to have an uneven impact on different aspects of democracy. So development looks to be increasingly relevant for equality, because that's kind of where a lot of the, say, biases might be stemming from. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of focus on deployment. That's kind of been the focus of the regulation on as well. That's obviously important, as that's where a lot of the harms and impacts are realized essentially. But if we only focus on the deployment, that just disregard the earlier stages of AI life cycle, and that's already the place where a lot of the influential decisions are made. As I mentioned, there might be biased data at the early cycles, which then cascade in downstream harms, as a lot of us know. And overall, I think democratic procedures and practice might be rather challenging to realize if all of the digital infrastructure that kind of govern the modern public sphere are launched by private platforms and technology companies with private profit incentives. So in general, there's a need to kind of holistically evaluate the entire life cycle of AI systems in terms of democracy. So this kind of concerns their use, development, perhaps even how the profits are shared, and most importantly, the governance of these systems. And here's just a messy visualization of what I was trying to say, but if we're thinking back to those pillars of democracy, it does appear that things like, say, participation and freedom might actually be very important from the very early onset of the design of systems, where we might be focused on different participatory design requirements, perhaps even compute governance, licensing, things of that nature. Whereas things like transparency and rule of law might be so more so focused at the very end of the life cycle of systems. In the deployment stage, we're thinking about different stage release and access policies, monitoring, oversight, perhaps more competition-oriented policies. I think what all of this means is there's perhaps a need to have a bit more of a infrastructural view of democratic AI governance. So rather than only focusing on the regulation on itself, it's likely that we need to tackle the concentration of power in AI through other policy instruments as well. So this might mean investments into digital public infrastructure, so that the European AI stack and systems are not at the complete whim of private US providers. There's been a lot of discourse about CERN for AI and other initiatives like that. But even there, I think it's important to recognize that it's worthwhile to consider how do we actually then govern those digital public infrastructures, because the same dynamics can also happen in the EU as in the US. But nevertheless, it does appear that if we're thinking about this more positive as democratic use of AI, they do require concentrated efforts, steering and investments by public bodies for them to actually actualize. And obviously, the actual implementation of the current regulation and its enforcement is still very important. There's also pressing questions in terms of open source AI systems. How do we balance between safety and openness there? We're concerned about risks like disinformation, perhaps that might require us to limit access to certain models, but that then also concentrates power to certain AI companies. So that's a kind of a dilemma which you have to. There's no clear-cut answer per se, but it is kind of a judgment call. Overall, returning to the kind of very start of this whole meeting, I think it's worth to bear in mind that AI's effect on democracy, they do represent kind of a cultural, economic, and structural change. So these policies and legislation are only part of the answer. There is certainly a need for wider, more bottom-up democratic interventions with civil society. Those might relate to the digital literacy and other things, whereby we actually have this more bottom-up fashion for democracy. But I will leave it at that, and we will continue the discussion in smaller groups. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Atta. And since you've already sort of teed up what happens next, I think we'll go to that without any hesitation. So as Atta mentioned, we're going to give you the opportunity to enter into one of two smaller breakout rooms, one of which will be convened by Jussi around the questions of content creation with generative AI, and another one looking at governance frameworks and policy roadmap. So the names of the two breakout rooms are in the chat, in case you're wondering which one you want to go to. And I think that those breakout rooms will open in just a moment. And we're going to give you about 10 minutes in the breakout rooms and call you back at about 15:25. And we'll ask your rapporteur for a very quick wrap up as a way of sort of moving towards the closing of the meeting. So if we want to open up the breakout rooms.
Impact on competitiveness and yeah.
Hello, everyone. I think we are all back now. We are out of time, but maybe what I might do is ask our two rapporteurs for literally one sentence wrap up of the discussions, just to share with the other side. And then just to assure the remaining participants that we will actually share the recordings and the wrap up and the slides with you all afterwards so that you can kind of dig more into things. And of course, so that if you have any questions, you can send them into us or any further feedback on the policy brief. So maybe from Tiffany and Jussi, just one sentence on your breakout room.
Yeah, so basically we discussed about the issues related to AI when it comes to AI producing creative content. We saw that it can undermine actually the dignity of the artist, and so this is in terms of the artist, but also for everyone. So it discourages basically creative thinking, because if you have this kind of tool, you will not leave yourself the space to try, so basically to construct piece by piece, and you will just think about the output, going directly to the output, rather than actually the process, which is actually the main characteristic of an artistic work.
Absolutely. Very, very interesting. Great wrap up. Okay, Atte, a quick wrap up from you as well.
Yeah, very multifaceted. We did talk about, say, the code of practice about AI, how the rule of law things might be missing there, and also ended up on a note about kind of how perhaps we should also be a lot of discourse about neutrality of technology, which is probably not true, but perhaps the same could be said for governance as well. So perhaps we can't and we shouldn't be kind of trying to strive towards global governance. Perhaps that's kind of a European dream in a sense. Perhaps that's not neutral either. So very good discussion. Thanks.
A very good point to end on. So again, thank you to everyone who stuck with us to the very end and indeed past the end time. We do hope to hear from you and see you at our events in the future. And again, if you have any feedback for us on the policy brief or on anything that was discussed today, please by all means do get in touch. We'll talk soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.